or if you were certain you'd hit it, but you didn't see what happened to it, you'd claim it as a damage.
Yeah. Let's move on to when one of them damaged you, or a couple. I think there were 6 of them damaged you at one stage. You and your number 2 went over a place called Le Tréport in northern France.
Oh, well, we often went over the Tréport. I was shot down just short of the Tréport.
Yeah.
That was a long time after we're talking. I mean,
that's right.
That was in 43. Yeah.
I'm just conscious of the time here. We want to hear you talking about motor cars too, but the guys will want to hear about aeroplanes at the start.
Yeah.
So we've got to jump a bit, if that's all right with you.
Yes, certainly.
But I think that story you tell about being shot down and watching shadows and things. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, well, no, I was in a bad mood anyway because I'd been put back on, having gone up to Spitfire 9s, which would cope with the Focke-Wulf. I was switched back to 5s, which wouldn't. And I was determined to get one, even though I was in a 5. And I went down to 10 of them, down below us. And I was leading a flight of 6, and I said, oh, come on, let's go and get one. And I went down, and it took this thing a long time to catch fire. So if you caught fire, you could claim it destroyed.
Yeah.
If caught fire, if the brake bails out or it hits the ground, it's destroyed. And I was climbing up, thinking my number 2 is with me, there's someone behind me. And the next minute there's that bit of a bang in the back of the cockpit, and it wasn't. It was a Focke-Wulf with white spinner, looking like a Spitfire, but to me. And he had some mates, and I knew I was in real trouble because no one had come down with me, and I was on my own with this mob. So I went for the deck, and I was doing the usual thing that you did in those circumstances, as low as you can get. Because it's very hard to hit anyone who's very low, because to hit him, you've got to get right behind him. If you get right behind him, you get in his slipstream, and you're being tossed around like this. You can't get a decent shot. And I got away with it till I got to the French coast, and I was going as far as I could until they got close. And I was looking at the 2 shadows on the ground. And when it looked about sort of 500 yards, I'd whip round and we'd have another circus. And eventually I just got inside of the sea, and I got hit in the radiator, and I looked at my shadow, and there was a great plume behind the shadow. And I had to do something fairly quickly. And the first idea was climb up and bail out. Then I thought, well, when I do, they'll blow me to pieces. And so I stuffed it into the ground.
Yeah, so when you stuffed it into the ground, you'd forgot you had your straps undone.
Yeah, you always unlocked your top straps when you're in a fight, because you could turn right round and have a look behind you. But with all this panic going on, I'd forgotten to lock them, so I pushed my face through the gun sight and made a mess of my face. But of course you don't know you've done that because you can't see your face. Only after the French resistance found me, and they kept asking me, did I want to surrender to the Germans? And I kept saying, why? And they got a mirror and showed me.
So you didn't surrender, but they took you away somewhere and patched you up a bit, and then what happened?
Well, they had to patch me up a bit because I couldn't be seen in public with this mess on my face. And when it had cleared up enough to be seen, one day they said, okay, well, you're off tomorrow. And we had a little party and sang God Save the King and all that sort of stuff. And I got on a bike with another fellow, and we set off. And I didn't know at the time, but we were going to meet a Lysander landing with some spies at midnight that night, because it was full moon. And when we got there, the whole thing had blown, and the Germans had found out about it, and so we had to go and hide, and then they didn't know what to do with me, and so they sent me to Paris, and I stayed with a French-Canadian spy until one day the escape organisation turned up, and said, what do you want to do? You can wait a moon period, which was another month, because you could say they could only land these things in the dark, full moon, and or you can go over the Pyrenees. And I said, well, what's that? What time? And they said, oh, I don't know, a couple of days, 4 days. And I said, well, that's a lot better than a month. So I did it that way, except it's 10 days, of course. But
walked over the Pyrenees.
you walk into Barcelona, and I got away with it. And
down into
down to Madrid and Gibraltar, flown back. They sent me after that to do fighter affiliation with 5 group bombers, and it seemed to me that they'd farmed me out there. They didn't want me to go back to an operational Spitfire squadron. And Johnny Johnson rang me up one day and said, you know, how's life? And I said, oh, I'm sick of this. And he said, well, come down to my squadron of Canadians and do a show with us. So I did. I flew down and hopped into a Canadian aircraft, and we flew around Paris, and we didn't see anything to shoot at. And I went back to my chasing around after bombers, and he then rang up and said, look, when the balloon goes off, come down and do a show with us after the invasion.
This was D-Day, was the balloon on 6th of June.
Yes,
yeah.
And so when it did happen, that's what I did. I went down and joined the Canadians and did a show with them, which turned into an interesting thing. That as we were taxiing out to take off, Johnny called me on the radio and said, one of the blokes has got a flat tyre, you stay and then bring him over, and we'll go for a second show, because the whole idea was we were going to try out the refuelling of the first airfield they opened up in Normandy, and do a second show from there and go back to England. So that's what I did. I took him over and we flew up and down the beachhead, feeling rather brave and thinking that, why the hell is the Luftwaffe? And there wasn't any Luftwaffe. There was a lot of fighting going on.
What about flak?
Yeah. Well, we moved in to sort of see how far all the gliders and parachutists had gone. And then the German flak started coming up, so we nipped back out of that. And normally we might have gone down and shot at it, but I didn't know what to do because I wasn't officially there. Anyway, at that moment almost, I heard on the radio that they were getting near, the wing was getting near back, the other 35 aircraft. And so I thought, well, I don't want to land last on a dirt strip after 35 aircraft have landed raising dust and filth. I'll nick in first. So I nicked in first, and my number 2, obviously the other Canadian, he came with me, and we taxied to the end of this strip. They started refueling us with jerry cans, and it was a pretty slow job, and the wing came in, and everything was going on. It was.
These were all Canadians, weren't they?
They're all Canadians.
They're all
yes.
Canadians other than Tony.
Yes. Well, there was French media there, funny enough, as well as the Canadian media. Or maybe they were just French Canadians, I don't know. But and they all came and said, you know, where do you come from? First back to land. Operationally, they'd had people in testing it, and I'd forgotten how I tried to make it. I said, oh yes, well I come from Melbourne, you know.
Hey, where do you come from? Where in Canada do you come from?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what did you say?
I said, tried Melbourne and it didn't work, and I said, oh, well, I come from Australia. And they said, no. And luckily for me to say them too much, they went and argued with my number two, who was a Canadian. And everything cooled down, and we were invited to go sniper shooting and things, because it took a long time to refuel 36 aircraft with jerry cans. And in the end, I thought, well, this is getting out of control when their whole Air Force, well, the 83 group, where Commander Broadhurst turned up, and I thought, now he knows me. Johnny will be in real trouble because I shouldn't be here. And so when I got back to Ford, where we were operating from then, I thought, well, I better get back to where I should be, because if he did see me, there's going to be a whole lot of, what the hell's he doing flying a Canadian airplane anyway? And so I went back to to Swindley, where I was in 5 Group, to be met by a very angry Air Commodore there, who said, and where the hell have you been? And he said, you took a Spitfire, where have you been? And so I told him, and he said, well, your punishment will be announced over the tannoy radio at 12 o'clock. So at 12 o'clock they rang up and said, you will talk for 20 minutes on what you saw underneath you when you were flying over the landings. And that was the only thing I had to do. So,
well, what about we move on now to the piece de resistance when you took a propeller-driven aircraft and you went after a squirt, or 3 squirts, 262s. You remember that?
Oh yes, there's one thing I was going to talk about. I might just talk about in the very early days. There's another pilot officer with me called Dickie Stewart, who I later flew with a lot, and we ended up driving at Le Mans together. But he was a very serious chap, and everything had to be organised. And one day when the Germans used to come in on a bad weather day, cloud base about 1,000 feet, and Ju-88 Dorniers dropped bombs and nicked back into cloud, and the whole squadron was sent off, except for Nicky Stewart and I. And we were there to guard the airfield when they came back, because they'd all be refuelling and there'd be nothing to guard the airfield. But he didn't hear it properly, and he took off with all the others. And when he got in the air, he suddenly realised he shouldn't be in the air. And he started coming into land, and as he came into land, this Ju-88 popped out of the cloud there and started coming down with bombs dropping out of it. I've never seen a Spitfire move so quickly. I mean, he was, whoa, out of the way. And afterwards I said, but mate, all you had to do was pull your nose up and fire the guns and you'd have got one.
Okay, well, that's what you did with the 262s, did you not?
No, well, the 262s, of course, were a brilliant airplane. I mean, the engines weren't very reliable, but I mean, they I mean, you compare them with the Meteor, which I went on right at the end of the war. They were the same power, or probably not quite so much as we had, and 100 miles an hour quicker. They had the air to themselves. If they'd had a good amount of fuel, they were turning them out, you know. I mean, they turned out 500 or 600 of the things. And they were cruising at everyone else's more than maximum speed. And like all the German aircraft, they suffered from lack of fuel because the refineries making the stuff were being bombed day and night, and the supply of fuel just dried right down. I mean, some of the airfields that we captured had rows of aircraft that someone had tried to set fire to, but they couldn't because there wasn't any fuel in them.
Well, I remember you telling me that you and your number two were flying along and you saw three of them. And
Oh, my number two wasn't with me.
Was he?
No, he was down. I left him down below.
right.
We were guarding the army because there is Arado 234 jet bombers were coming above the cloud. Cloud base was about 10,000 feet tall, and they were coming on a beam, which the Germans bombed on a beam, and then you got a signal at the end. And these 234s were coming through, and they were going too fast for us to do much about except take a shot at them to try and get them to turn. And I woke up to what they were doing, so I said to number two, look, you stay below, I'll go above. And because they're obviously flying just above the cloud and then ducking down through. And I climbed up through the cloud and iced up, and I couldn't see much out of the windscreen, so I was doing a circuit in the sun to get the ice off the windscreen, and these three 262s flew by. And so I thought, well, I'll chase them and see what happens. And absolutely flat out, everything, 150 octane, 25 pounds of boost. I very slowly was catching them up in Spit 14, and we were flying absolutely straight into the sun, so all I'd got was silhouettes, which was tricky because I didn't know, it hadn't been published what their wingspan was, and you set your gun sight on the wingspan and it gave you the range. So I went on, I suddenly realised, good God, I'm within range to shoot at this thing, so I did, and hit it in the starboard engine and the cockpit, and it broke away, and his mates went straight into the cloud.
That was a very quiet way of saying. You didn't say that to me the first time. You said you hit the first one, and I said, "What happened to that?" He said, "I don't know. They pissed off."
Well, if I'd had a later model, the 14E, I'd have had a gyro sight.
Yeah.
And with a gyro sight, I could have sat back 300 or 400 yards and got the three of them. But without the accuracy of that gyro sight, I mean, just an ordinary sight, you had to get in fairly close to make sure you got it.
I'm going to jump ahead now to Tony the Larrikin, just before the end of the war, and you wanted to fly a jet, a 262, and you knew there was some way up the road, and you decided to go and try one out. Yeah,
well, we've been flying over the Danish frontier sort of way, the Kiel and the rest in Midtjylland, and see these 262s sitting on the ground in Schleswig airfield. Nothing really occurred to me at the time, except that the war suddenly ended, and everything was as normal because it was more or less an armistice to start with, not a really signed thing. We weren't shooting at everything, but everything stopped, and the Germans were allowed to keep their arms until they were actually captured. And Schleswig looked as if it was fully operational. So I thought, well, I want to learn how to fly one of these 262s, and if I'm not quick, all the people who know how will be in prisoner of war camps. So I had a word with my sergeant and said, what the hell can go wrong with a Meteor that I can put right? And he said, well, sometimes if you fly through an icy cloud, you'll get a high jet pump temperature. So I said, right, jet pipe temperature. So that's what I did. And I called up and said, I've got a high jet pipe temperature, emergency landing at Schleswig. And did it, taxied up to the end of the row of the 262s and parked it and said, I want to see the CO. And of course, all the German pilots spoke better English than we did. And the CO arrived and asked me what the hell I wanted, and I said, I want to fly 262. You've got quite a lot of them here. And he said, absolutely impossible. I think that he said we'd be shot at straight away. And the second thing is that I'd be court-martialed and both. So, but I will show you how to start one up, and I'll run through all the flying stuff. So that's what he did. He sat in the back seat of one of the night fighters and got me to start up and do everything except actually fly it. And it was complicated because their jet engines started on petrol, and then you had to very slowly rev them up to a fixed figure and change over onto jet fuel. And all your throttle movements had to be very slow and steady, or you break up the airflow in the engines. And so they were tricky things that way to fly.
So you didn't fly it?
No.
But you got out and then you got mixed up with some other form of alcohol, did you not, that night?
No, not really. Oh, he offered me, he said, the army's going to take us over tomorrow and we'll all be prisoners. He said, we're going to have the party of all time tonight, why don't you stay and join in? And